For Cold Rhymes Records, this is P.T. Burnem and Happy Little Trees. Today I'm going to be demonstrating some things on the Elektron model samples groovebox, talking to you a little bit about musical phrasing. What we're going to do is we're going to actually start off with a song, classic, hype track, I Can't Stand to Be Refused, off of the album Rock and Roll, which is one of my very favorites. We're going to take a look at it and we're going to talk about its phrasing. The reason I wanted to show you that at the beginning was because the musical phrasing is very strong and very apparent in that song. Dun dun, which is really sort of played out by his vocals with the all panned out, but it's three triplet. It's a slow triplet, and two of those triplets are hit on the kick drum. Boom boom. It sort of helps the song write itself in this way, where if you've got a phrase that works and is something, bum, bum, bum. And that's a very simple musical phrase. If it's strong or if it's not strong, what you're usually working with, if you've come up with something like a melody or a rhythm, is a musical phrase. And it's good to think of it that way. Boom, boom, boom. Because then you can try it on different instruments. You can try it in different ways and in different places. And in this way, generate new ideas for the song by not only repeating and reiterating that musical phrase, but also elaborating on that musical phrase. One example in there is the main riff, which is that like it is its own thing, but you can hear boom 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. That main sort of triplet rhythm is still present there, but obscured either through repetitious playing and letting it evolve into something else, or the understanding of that interplay and the using of that part, that particular sample. Not only that, but his vocals are following that all panned out, and the grappling hook, and how it all panned out. Those emphases make up the main musical phrase of that song. The biggest part is to take what you're doing and understand that it is a phrase. If you've got a melody and you're like, ugh, I need a bass line, and where do I even begin? Well, a good place to begin is to take a chunk. It doesn't even have to be the first starting chunk, but you could take the middle chunk, bring it to the beginning, and use that as your bass line. Start there. Start with those rhythms or those melodic structures and movements. In this way, you can know, where to, blossom things out from. And in addition, because they're all coming from a similar source, they do have a connectivity that helps give the song a cohesiveness, make it feel like a song. And you can have many, many different musical phrases within a single song. Some of them being more dominant, and each one of them can influence each other, in fact. And this actually happens naturally when you've got a band jamming and stuff like that. But as a music producer in a singular setting, you have to sort of make sure that that happens. And musical phrasing, thinking of things in terms of musical phrases, is one of those ways. I think there is this tendency for current music makers to want like an all-in-one box. And you don't necessarily need to take a track from like, I had a generative idea to like finished product in a day. It can take a while in the way where we separate the processes. I'm not going to finish the track on this groove box. I may not even use the drum sounds that I'm using right now in the final track. In this way, it's free to sort of grow organically as it sits inside my mind with nothing really saying this is final, except for the musical phrases that I've come up with, maybe a couple things about the beat and a kind of sound, sort of texture. This machine is good for that sort of thing, this beginning groove. What we have here is these big pads are what they call tracks, but I tend to think of them as pads. They each have a sample that can be triggered. So right now I'm using these 3 tracks. And as you can imagine, it's pretty powerful. We can bring in the beat. It's very simple. But I'm using about almost all my available slots. And it only has 6 available slots. The goal is to get a beginning groove going that contains some good musical phrases. What we've got here is these pads, which can be, different sounds can be loaded on them by pushing this. You access a menu, a hard drive. I'm not going to go into all the very, very technical things of how to select sounds. You basically select them with this orange knob and can go back and forth between all of your folders of different sounds and load one up to here. You can do the same for this, same for this, same for those. Each of these knobs only does one thing, and that's really cool. When you select the track, you know that this knob is going to adjust the sample start of this sample that you've selected. A decay envelope brings the volume of the sound down automatically. And that's a very short envelope, so it goes down very quickly. When I lengthen the decay, you can see those numbers going up. Then it's a very long sound. Now, you obviously can't make the sound longer than the original recorded sound. It doesn't work that way. Buttons here labeled 1 through 16, you can think of that as one line of a grid. If you're used to doing things on a computer with grid, as the sequence moves along, you can put more in there. And if we unmute it, you can hear them. How's that? You listen to these snares, and we can do all sorts of things to them. And in fact, let's bring those hi-hats in real quick. So you see that? How I put those in there? Now what I want is for this note here in the middle to be quieter. And I don't have to do any mouse clicking or do anything like that. I just push it and I grab it that way. And then I adjust its volume. And now you can hear it. And that's got a more realistic feeling. You can do that with all of them, you know. Take them down a little bit. That's one way to make variation very quick, because when you push one of these notes that you've laid down, you can edit just that note's parameters. Let's bring these down to a very, very quick decay. Now, we could just grab these two. You have to do it one at a time, but you can grab each one and adjust only that instance, its decay. See how that one's long now? And what we're just doing is getting a little groove down. Not only is it fast, but it can get relatively complex if you dive down deep into it. It's definitely got its limitations. As you can see, this grid, unlike the grids on the computer or on something like Logic, the resolution is 16 steps like this. You hear how those hats are running? We're going to double their scale. Now you hear, obviously, the kick hasn't changed. I actually like this pattern sped up. And that's basically at double its own speed from before. Here it is at 1. But if we double its speed, it sounds a lot more interesting. Right? Sometimes you'll have a phrase that only sounds okay. Rather than trashing it because you want something that really sounds great, try doubling its speed, or halving, cutting in half its speed, or applying it to a different instrument. I can't tell you how many bass lines I've written on the acoustic guitar. Yeah, I thought they were acoustic, melodies, but they turned out to be bass lines. As you get more familiar with phrasing, you understand what goes where or what potentially could go where. Not only is volume important, but dynamics, the sound of the harmonics that come with a hit. There's more harmonic content and noise in the beginning of the hit than at the end. So that's why as we adjust that sample start, it sounds like a quieter little tickety-tickety hit as opposed to back here. It sounds more hard. As you can imagine, adjusting that allows you to get a really good range of dynamics. And again, very quickly. Don't give up on a phrase. If a phrase has entered your mind in a musical phrase, refine it the way you would maybe a vocal phrase. If you've said something like, that chair is cool, you might refine it to be more exact and say that chair is elegant. Same thing can be done in a musical phrase as you get used to it. Sing them a little bit. In fact, putting them on a different instrument is a good way to find a new iteration of them that you can then reapply to the original instrument. A melody variation that you never would have found on the original instrument that you created the melody on because of the way it's laid out. But now you've found this new one because you put it on a new instrument, and you can bring that back to the instrument that you were using. So that's a great way to organically find different aspects of musical phrases that you want to use. So here I've laid down a hi-hat pattern. Hear how these two patterns are still, this main pattern is still present. It's just surrounded by other micro notes that obscure it, give it a new groove. Something which I really love about the Elektron boxes, which is called chants. That basic hi-hat pattern, always playing. But then there are little sub-notes that I've added here that then in the next sequence, what I've changed is that those sub-notes don't always play. I can adjust that here now live by adjusting chants here so that this doesn't always play. And you can see the numbers going up as to the percentage of whether it will play. You can also make it so that it will only play every other time or every third time. We'll take the notes that aren't the main and we will bring their chants down so they're not always hitting, not 100% of the time. And now we get a nice random variation. Not only does the randomness help with kind of ideas of what might sound good, but it keeps the beat fresh in your mind while you're making it. I like to think of it as a drummer who's got a main groove in mind, but is free to play around a little bit. Okay, you hear those knocks? Nudge it around. You'll watch this turn into a sort of meter, and you can nudge it around. Adds a little urgency. Or a little later, adds a little bit of laziness. Listen close to the hi-hat pattern. Okay, what's really cool about, I'm going to unmute the kicks and snares again. With these individual tracks, their length can be edited very quickly and very easily. Right now we've got the hi-hats going, but we can, and right now they're running for all 16 beats. It's running in a straight loop that is perfectly in sync with the kicks and the snares. But we're going to break that up now. We're going to make the hat sound weird by reducing the number of steps that they play. We can take it way down. You can adjust it right there on the fly. And depending on how you lay out your original hats, those variations can get very interesting. Limitations themselves are useful, right? Because
you don't want to be completing a track ideally on a groove box. Just the way that you can get various timings and quick variation within patterns makes this thing very useful. When it hits there, bang. Now let's say I wanted it to be a variation where sometimes it was a shorter snare, didn't go all the way. What I can do is put another snare in front of it. It just doubles it. But if I reduce that snare's volume all the way to 0, it cuts it. Now what we do is combine that with chance. And now most of the time it goes, sometimes it's cut. And it's random. It doesn't have to be random, but there it is. And speed that up. We can stop those retrigs the same way we stopped the other one. So you see how you can use randomness not only to make randomness occur for just playing the notes, but also randomness occur in the length of those notes. This is sort of like a play on the vocal melody or the vocal rhythm of, you know, all planned out, it's not a happening look, I'm going off the wall, back into the brook. So you see how I played on that. And you could do it a million different ways. And one thing I like about the model samples is it also has this mode, which I'll talk about real quick, which is it can load up a single wave. And we have to understand a wave regularly repeated sounds to us as a tone. And what this will do is repeat that, making a tone. So I've just loaded up a single waveform, but because I've put this sort of looping button on, it will loop continuously, and then I can adjust it using the decay. So I can get some rudimentary synth sounds. You can't get a lot of pad sounds because that would, you know, involve using attack parameter, which we don't have here. So we can only really get sort of key sounds and stuff like that. But here's the deal. It really encourages playing around with these sounds. It already doesn't sound like the hype track. It's just important to remember that these simple phrases really are what make up the DNA of a good song. I think it can be a tendency on the part of music making early to think that the stuff you have is too simple. So you try to complicate it or adorn it with various things, and forgetting that what you have there at its core is a musical phrase which can be rearranged and treated like the thing that it is. Think about a record like Dark Side of the Moon, or even like, you know, Telephone by Lady Gaga. These things have strong musical phrases which register with you, and they're reiterated and played around with inside the song if you notice and start listening for it. Basic breakdown of the Elektron and how you can use it to start things. It's quite useful and quick and immediate and physical, and that's the way that I think an instrument that's bringing about the main groove for something should be. But again, when I'm using this machine, I'm definitely not looking to create a finished song layout. Mostly I'm just looking to get basic grooves going. You know, musical phrases.